Greystone Hall stood like a sentinel from a bygone era, its ivy-draped stone walls weathered by time, its proud gables jutting against the graying English sky. The estate, seated on the outskirts of the sleepy village of Chipping Darnley, was a place of whispers, half-truth, half-ghost story. The locals spoke of it with a blend of reverence and discomfort, as though its grand silhouette cast not just a shadow, but a presence. Inside, all was warm light and polished mahogany. Silver trays gleaming in fireplaces crackling softly against the autumn chill. Chapter 1. It was the second weekend of October when Lady Constance Willoughbyridge, Pirius, and recently widow, invited a peculiar assortment of guests to stay for what she called a civilized gathering before the frost set in. In truth, such gatherings at Greystone Hall were never without an undercurrent of drama, and Lady Constance would never admit how much she thrived on the friction between polite society and barely concealed disdain. The guests arrived over the course of Friday afternoon, their cars crunching over the gravel drive. Met at the door by the butler, Hammond, stoic, slow-moving, and deeply suspicious of all things modern. First came Colonel Archibald Race, stiff as the epaulets he had long retired, a cane tapping as he walked, though he rarely needed it. He had served with Lady Constance's late husband and made a point of visiting the manor at least twice a year. She tolerated him like an antique chair, comforting but splintered. "Constance," he said, removing his hat and bowing slightly. "Always a pleasure. The house smells of tobacco and treachery as it should." Next arrived Miss Iris Denham, in a modest navy coat with gloves that seemed too pristine for countryside travel. Kai was young, mid-20s perhaps, and beautiful in a muted way. Her eyes darted too often, as if measuring every object and person against a private checklist. She had been Lady Constance's companion for 3 years. Few could say precisely what that entailed. Most assumed she earned her keep through obedience and silence. Dr. Lionel Harcourt followed, his car gleaming despite the muddy roads. Tall, sleek, and overly courteous, he greeted Hammond with a practiced smile and produced a bottle of claret for his hostess. He had been the Willoughby family physician for 15 years, and while his presence was welcomed, it often carried with it an air of watching more than healing. "Nothing like country air and a roaring fire to clear the lungs," he said smoothly. "And good wine to cloud the judgment, eh?" Later came Miles Willoughby, the estranged nephew and once heir presumptive. He was broad-shouldered and ruddy-cheeked, with a poorly concealed limp and a habit of flicking ash from his cigarette without regard for carpet or company. Having returned from Kenya under unclear circumstances, he bore the marks of hard living and harder disappointment. His greeting to his aunt was clipped. "Aunt Constance," he said, brushing past the butler, still ruling with an iron fist. "I hope." And finally, there was Beatrice Montrose, the vicar's wife, wearing a faded tweed coat and clutching her handbag like a relic. She was not an obvious guest, and even she seemed uncertain of her purpose at Greystone. She had been invited only the day before, her name scribbled in by Lady Constance with a curious smile. Beatrice was not rich, nor particularly social, but she had a quiet gravity to her listener. Keeper of secrets whispered across pews in confessions. By sunset, the house was full. Dinner that night was held in the great hall, where an ancient chandelier swayed ever so slightly as though reacting to the tension at the long oak table. The butler and a maid moved silently between guests, refilling glasses and presenting each course with solemn grace. The roast was tender, the vegetables slightly overdone. Lady Constance had never trusted foreign influences in her kitchen, and her cook, Mrs. Willett, was as English as suet pudding. Conversation began cordially, with pleasantries and shared observations about the changing weather. But Lady Constance never one to let things rest, prodded and prodded. "Miles, I trust you haven't brought any of those habits Back with you from Nairobi, she said, with raised eyebrows. Miles smiled tightly. Not unless you count the habit of paying attention to who's about to die. God. Dr. Harcourt gave a low chuckle. Let's not speak of death at the dinner table, he said, glancing at Constance, who seemed amused rather than offended. Beatrice Montrose said little, pushing her food about, while Miss Denham picked at her plate and excused herself before dessert. Colonel Race told an anecdote about a misfired hunting rifle and guffawed alone. The evening wore on like a play rehearsed too many times. Beneath the forced laughter and refilled wine glasses lurked old wounds inheritance, betrayal, affection withheld and unwanted. As the clock in the hallway struck 10, the guests began to disperse. Lady Constance lingered in the drawing room with Dr. Harcourt, sipping a second glass of port and murmuring something about wills and paperwork. The fire hissed as a log split in the grate. Upstairs, Iris was seen returning from the west wing, her face pale. Miles loitered near the study, apparently searching for a misplaced lighter. Beatrice wandered the halls, glancing at the portraits with something like suspicion. Colonel Race retired early, muttering about indigestion. Then, at precisely 10:43 p.m., the scream shattered the stillness. It came from the upper landing, sharp, female, and strangled with panic. Footsteps followed, rapid and clumsy, and the sound of something shattering echoed off the stairwell. Moments later, Iris Denham appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide, her voice trembling. She's dead, she managed to gasp. Lady Constance, something's wrong her. The house erupted into confusion. Dr. Harcourt pushed past the others and mounted the stairs, his bag swinging in one hand. Colonel Race rose stiffly, cane forgotten, and followed with a clenched jaw. Beatrice clutched her crucifix. Miles, curiously, did not move at all, but stood watching the hallway with a strange, unreadable smile. Upstairs, in Lady Constance's bedchamber, the windows were closed and the curtains drawn. The fire had burned low. She lay propped in bed, still dressed in her dinner gown, a cup tipped sideways on her bedside table. Her lips were parted. Kide eyes wide open held the kind of stillness that could no longer blink. She's gone, Dr. Harcourt said, placing 2 fingers on her throat. Poison, I suspect. The signs are classic. Within the hour, the village constable arrived, red-faced and breathless. He sealed the matter with a stammer and a trembling pen, mumbling about no one in or out until the inspector arrives in the morning. Outside, the first flurries of snow drifted down, blanketing the gravel path like fate's own decree. Downstairs, the guests sat scattered and silent. The fire snapped, the clock ticked. The silence was total, except for the words whispered by Beatrice Montrose. More prayer than observation. If only that Belgian detective were here. What's his name again? Poirot? Unbeknownst to her, miles away in London, Hercule Poirot was already reviewing a telegram with elegant fingers and narrowing eyes. By morning, the snow had thickened across the Wiltshire countryside, muffling the world in a hush of white. Greystone Hall, once stately and commanding, now looked strangely isolated, stranded in a soft sea of silence. The village constable, young and overwhelmed, had remained stationed in the drawing room most of the night, dozing off in a wingback chair with a mug of lukewarm tea and a notebook half filled with misspelled names. Upstairs, Lady Constance's bedroom had been cordoned off with a length of velvet rope repurposed from the billiards room. No one entered. No one dared. The air in the house had shifted, growing tighter, more fragile, as if any sudden word might shatter the fragile shell of civility they all clung to. Shortly after 9 o'clock, the sound of wheels crunching ice startled the household. Beatrice Montrose was the first to rise from her seat near the fire, peeking through the lace curtains. Carsmall, dark, elegant, was gliding up the snow-covered drive. Cade's movement was graceful, determined, unaffected by the slippery surface beneath its tires. From the passenger door emerged a short, neatly dressed man in a charcoal wool coat, gloved hands clasped around the handle of a valise. His mustache was immaculately waxed, his boots spotless despite the conditions. He paused at the base of the steps, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the facade of the manor with a peculiar blend of admiration and scrutiny. Inside, Colonel Race stood and grumbled. What the devil now? Another copper, Dr. Harcourt, who had stationed himself by the drinks cabinet since breakfast, poured himself another sherry, despite the hour. Unless your village constable has acquired a sense of continental flair, I'd wager this is someone ... else. The front door opened with an echoing creak. Hammond, the butler, announced the visitor in his usual monotone. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. At the name, a perceptible ripple passed through the room. Poirot stepped in, removing his gloves with precision and handing his hat to Hammond as though it were a priceless artifact. His gaze moved slowly across the room, pausing on each face, lingering, calculating, yet unfailingly polite. Messieurs, Madame, he greeted with a faint bow. I come at the request of Inspector Hensley of the Wiltshire Constabulary. He has asked for my assistance in a matter of delicate nature. Yes. Beatrice nodded instinctively, as though answering a prayer. Dr. Harcourt cleared his throat. I take it, Monsieur Poirot. You've been briefed. Only the barest facts, Poirot replied, stepping deeper into the drawing room. A sudden death, under circumstances which suggest but do not confirm foul play. The deceased, Lady Constance Willoughby. The body, untouched since the time of discovery. The household, sealed. Yes, that is what I know. Miles Willoughby had entered quietly during the exchange, his expression unreadable. He lit a cigarette and leaned against the doorway, regarding Poirot with something between amusement and disdain. And what is it you plan to do, monsieur? He asked. Sniff the tea leaves. Read our palms. Poirot's brow arched, not insulted, but intrigued. Nan, Monsieur Willoughby, I intend to use the most powerful investigative tool in all the world. Oh, and what's that? Poirot tapped his temple lightly. The little gray cells. Miles chuckled and retreated to the far end of the room. Poirot allowed the moment to pass before turning to the constable. You have taken the preliminary statements? Yes, sir, the constable said, straightening, but not properly. Was waiting for the inspector. Didn't want to well do it wrong? Poirot offered a faint smile. Wise. One wrong question, and the true murderer could vanish into myth. The air in the room shifted again, a current of subtle unease flowing beneath the furniture, the art, the people. Poirot could feel it. The murder had already begun to rot the illusion of civility. He would not need to poke, it would unfold of its own accord. I should like to see the body now, he said. Alone, if you please. The bedchamber of Lady Constance was grand, though not ostentatious. Thick curtains framed frost-blurred windows. A fire had been relit, its warmth countering the chill that death left behind. The scent of lavender lingered faintly, overwhelmed now by the sharper bite of something chemical tonic water. Camphor. Poirot moved with deliberate care, stepping between the velvet ropes as if passing into sacred ground. The bedclothes were undisturbed, save for a faint tangle at the foot her final movement. Perhaps, or someone else's. The teacup lay on the table beside her, tipped just slightly toward the edge, as though it had been set down without thought. He leaned in, no lipstick on the rim. Curious, Poirot sniffed the cup, noted the faintest trace of almond. Cyanide. Too simple, too theatrical, but possible. The book at her side was closed, but not bookmarked. Poirot touched the cover room of one's own. An interesting choice. Had she been in the mood for solitude, or preparing for it? Her fingers were curled inward, not splayed. No sign of clutching or reaching. The face was twisted, but not in agony. Surprise, betrayal. There was more psychology in the stillness of the dead than in all the chatter of the living. Poirot walked slowly around the room, noting the dust patterns. A drawer left just a hair open. The faint outline of a missing book on a lower shelf. A chair slightly askew. Each detail a whisper. Each deviation a question. He stepped out 15 minutes later, eyes sharper than when he had entered. Downstairs, the household waited in varying states of anxiety and apathy. Iris Denham sat nearest the fire, shivering slightly, her hands wrapped tightly around a cold cup of tea. Poirot approached her first. "Mademoiselle Denham," he said gently, "you were the first to discover the body." She looked up, startled. "Yes, I was bringing her tea, as I do every night." Poirot nodded. "You were in the habit of preparing it yourself?" Lady Constance preferred it that way. She said the kitchen staff always steeped it too long. "Did you take it to her directly from the kitchen?" Iris hesitated. "No, I made it in the small scullery outside her room. There's a kettle there. I always use it." Poirot made no note. His eyes merely drifted to the others. Dr. Harcourt's fingers twitched around his glass. Colonel Race leaned forward as if about to interrupt, but said nothing. "And was anything amiss when you entered?" Poirot asked. She was sitting up in bed. I spoke her name. She didn't answer. Her eyes were open, but empty. I screamed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you touched nothing?" Iris shook her head violently. "No, I ran. I swear." Poirot turned to the room. "I shall speak with each of you, one by one. But allow me to assure you, this was not the work of chance. This was murder, planned and executed. Subtle, yes, but not invisible." A long silence followed. The wind howled outside, rattling a loose shutter upstairs. Poirot smiled faintly. "The truth, Mies Amos, has a habit of making itself known, and Hercule Poirot have a habit of listening when it speaks." Chapter 02. In the late morning light. The drawing room of Greystone Hall had transformed from an elegant retreat to an impromptu interrogation chamber. The fire crackled as before, and tea had been served on a silver tray. But its warmth could not melt the quiet frost forming between the guests. Poirot, seated with meticulous posture on a tufted armchair near the window, requested each guest to join him privately. Hammond, the butler, stood just outside the room, ushering them in and out with quiet solemnity. His own face remained unreadable, as though he had trained himself long ago not to react to the strangeness of the upper classes. First came Miss Iris Denham. She entered with slow, measured steps, hands folded in front of her like a schoolgirl, summoned before the headmaster. Her face, pale with fatigue, wore the faint trace of an old bruise beneath her left eye, hardly visible under powder. But not to Poirot's sharp gaze. "Please, mademoiselle, sit," he said, gently, gesturing to a velvet chair across from him. "You must forgive the unpleasantness of this situation. She nodded. "Of course, I understand. You were close to Lady Constance." "As close as one could be," Iris replied, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. She wasn't easy to work for, but I respected her, appreciated the opportunity." Poirot tilted his head. "She trusted you enough to let you prepare her tea?" "Yes, every evening." "Did she have any enemies?" A pause. "She made enemies easily," Iris admitted. "She was ... sharp, but not dangerous." "Not truly." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And yet, someone wished her dead." Iris's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot smiled kindly. "Calm me. Mademoiselle Denouer, were you, before you made the tea last night?" "In my room, reading. I came down to the scullery around 10:15. No one saw you?" "No." "Did Lady Constance have visitors yesterday afternoon?" Iris blinked, hesitating. "Yes, Mr. Miles spoke with her privately." at Dr. Harcourt. But that wasn't unusual. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then, with a polite smile, dismissed her. Okay. That will be all for now. As she exited, Poirot scribbled a brief note in his pocket diary. Second came Dr. Lionel Harcourt, looking more composed than one might expect of a man whose longtime patient had been found lifeless under his care. Dr. Harcourt, Poirot began. You were the first to examine Lady Constance's body. Keys. I ran up with the others after Miss Denham screamed. And what did you observe? No sign of struggle. Heart rate absent. Eyes fixed. A faint odorament, though it may have been cosmetic. I suspected poison immediately. You are well versed in poisons, then. I've seen my share of overdoses in town clinics. This seemed more deliberate. Poirot laced his fingers together. And her health before last night. She had high blood pressure and minor heart complications, but nothing terminal. No recent illnesses. Harcourt paused. Although she had requested laudanum for sleep in the last fortnight. Did you prescribe it? No, I offered a milder alternative, chamomile capsules. She didn't like taking medicine unless it came from her own cupboard. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, the older generation. Loyal to their discomforts. He made another note. And you, Dr. Ware, were you between 10 and 11 in the study? I was writing letters. Alone. Yes, Poirot's tone remained cordial, but something about Harcourt's answers struck him as too composed, too rehearsed. A man of medicine accustomed to covering gaps in truth with professional confidence. Mercy, Doctor. Next came Colonel Archibald Race. He arrived like a reluctant soldier summoned to an unnecessary skirmish. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression stoic. Colonel, forgive me. This is not a battlefield, but there is a campaign of truth to be fought. Race grunted and sat stiffly. You don't believe it was natural then? Poirot lifted an eyebrow. Do you? Constance had her enemies, but I didn't think one would be quite so ... theatrical. Your history with Lady Constance was long. Decades. Her husband and I served together in Burma. After he passed, I visited often. She needed someone grounded. You were close, as close as she let anyone be. Poirot's gaze narrowed slightly. And what of her nephew? Ray sighed. Fool. Loud, arrogant, unpredictable, but not capable of murder. Why unpredictable? He asked her for money, twice, once recently. When she refused, he threatened to cut ties altogether. I suspect he returned this weekend to try again. Where were you last night, Colonel? In the library, finishing my brandy and a few chapters of The Guns of August. Escamande saw me there when he brought the tray in. Poirot made a mental note to follow up. Alibis, once claimed, must be tested, not assumed. Mercy, Colonel, Beatrice Montrose followed. Quiet, restrained, with eyes that seemed to see more than she ever said aloud. Madame Montrose, Poirot greeted. You are perhaps the most unusual guest I know, she said softly. I wasn't meant to be here. Constance invited me late. She said it would be a relief to have someone without inheritance questions. I thought it strange, but I came. Why? Curiosity and pity. Poirot's expression turned slightly. Pity. She was an old woman. Sharp, yes. Lonely, even more so. You knew her well? Not well, but I knew her nature. I've been in the village 10 years. People talk, women confess. Did anyone seem ... tense yesterday? Beatrice hesitated. Miles was irritable. He argued with her. I overheard part of it in the corridor. Poirot leaned in. What was said? I only heard her voice, sharp and final. I would sooner burn it all than leave it to you. Then a door slammed. Poirot nodded slowly. And where were you during the time of the murder? In my room. I had taken a headache powder. I fell asleep early. Anyone see you? No. He did not press her. Something in her voice suggested sincerity. Perhaps a life well practiced in sounding sincere. Finally came Miles Willoughby. He entered with casual disdain, seating himself without being asked. "Let me guess," he said, flicking ash from his cigarette. "You're going to ask if I poisoned the old bat." Poirot smiled faintly. "Only if you wish to confess." "I don't," Miles replied, "but I'm sure someone wants me to look guilty." "That's how these stories go, isn't it?" Poirot's voice remained calm. "You argued with your aunt." "Did. She owed my family loyalty, if nothing else. I asked for an advance. She refused, said I was wasting my life." Poirot studied him. "And what did you say?" "Is that I'd rather see the money rot than stay in her control." Curious echo of her own words. Miles smirked. "Didn't know she said the same. Guess we were more alike than we liked to think." Poirot let the silence stretch. "Where were you last night?" "Smoking on the back terrace," asked the housemaid. "I startled her coming in." Poirot closed his notebook. "Mercy, Monsieur Willoughby. That will be all for now." As the door closed behind him, Poirot remained seated, unmoving, his gaze lost in the dancing firelight. The suspects had spoken, but none had yet revealed the truth. Lies, omissions, and subtle contradictions tangled the case like ivy on Greystone's walls. One fact was clear. Everyone had something to lose, and someone had already lost everything. The snow outside Greystone Hall had deepened, blanketing the hedgerows and garden statuary in ghostly white. Inside, the air was tighter, now less civil, more performative. Each guest had returned to their corners, watching, listening, speculating. The grand manor no longer felt like a weekend retreat. It was a gilded cage, and the bars had been drawn by death. Poirot remained in the drawing room for a time, sipping weak tea and making notes in his pocket diary. To the casual eye, he appeared relaxed, even idle. But behind those glinting brown eyes, thoughts churned in swift, symmetrical precision. Then came a knock at the door. It was Constable Lyle, breathless and carrying a brown envelope. "Message from Inspector Hensley." "Sir," he stammered, "and something else we've just heard from the coroner's office." Poirot accepted the envelope with a nod and opened it. Inside was a short note and a preliminary toxicology report from the county pathologist. He read it once, then again. His eyebrows rose slightly. On a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a murmur escaped him. "Arsenic," he said under his breath. The constable looked confused. "Sir," Poirot folded the paper neatly. "Lady Constance died of arsenic poisoning, ministered, most likely, through her tea. A classic poison less theatrical than cyanide, and more accessible." Constable Lyle blinked. But that, Poirot raised a hand. It complicates matters. Indeed, it did. Cyanide was dramatic, unmistakable, and typically quick. Arsenic, however, required dosage, timing, and a certain cold calculation. It pointed toward someone who planned carefully, someone who had access and patience, someone who knew she would die, not at once, but inevitably. Poirot summoned Hammond. "Ask Mademoiselle Denham to join me," he said softly, "and have the tea set from the scullery brought to the study. Do not touch the cups. Use gloves." Hammond bowed and left. 5 minutes later, Iris Denham entered once more, looking slightly frayed. Her composure, worn thin by interviews and suspicion, had begun to crack. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice dry. "You wanted to see me again? "Yes, mademoiselle. Please sit." She lowered herself into the chair with visible reluctance. Poirot leaned forward, hands steepled. "You said you prepared the tea last night." "Yes, as I always do." "Did you, by chance, leave it unattended?" At any moment. Her brows knit. No, I boiled the water, took out the tin, steeped it. I brought it straight to her room. Was anyone else near the scullery? I didn't see anyone, but there's no lock on the door. Poirot observed her carefully. Do you handle the tea tin regularly? Of course, it's in the upper cabinet, left side. Poirot paused. Would you say it's often used? It's only for Lady Constance? She had her own special blend. No one else liked it to bitter. Poirot gave a faint nod. Thank you, mademoiselle. That will be all. She hesitated before leaving. You think someone tampered with it? Before I even touched it? Poirot did not answer. After she departed, Poirot rose and made his way to the study. Hammond had left the tray on the sideboard, covered with a linen cloth. Poirot pulled on gloves, then gently removed the cover. The teacup was still faintly stained, a ring of dried liquid clinging to the bottom. Beside it, the teapot and sugar bowl sat innocently. But it was the small silver tin that drew his attention. He opened it carefully. The scent rose earthy, astringent, a blend of ceylon and something pungent like valerian root. He removed a small pinch and dropped it into a glass of warm water from the fireplace kettle. Tea steeped slowly, its bitterness rising like a warning. Poirot smelled it once, frowned, and set it aside. Someone had doctored the blend, he suspected. Not in a rush, but in preparation. Perhaps days ago, arsenic was not instantly lethal. In small doses it built up, causing fatigue, dizziness, confusion. Was this the first to soar? The last? A knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Constable Lyle again. Sir, he said, eyes wide. We may have something. The housemaid, the younger ones, says she saw something odd last night. Before the scream. Poirot stood. Where is she now? In the servants' wing. Shall I bring her? No, I will go to her. Sometimes the frightened speak better in familiar shadows. The maid, Nora, could not have been more than 18. She curtsied clumsily as Poirot entered the linen room. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, she said in a rush. I wasn't, honestly. Poirot raised a calming hand. No. Tell me what you saw. I was changing the bedding in the south guest room, the one next to Miss Denham's. I had finished folding the corners when I heard voices in the corridor. Raised voices. Whose? I'm not sure. One was Mr. Miles, I think. The other was Lady Constance. She said something like, "Don't you dare touch that. It's not yours." And then the door slammed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You're certain it was Miles? I think so. His voice has a sort of bite. Poirot nodded. And what time was this? 10:10. The clock in the hallway had just chimed. The timing fit. 15 minutes before the body was discovered. 15 minutes in which the fatal dose could have been administered or simply taken effect. Back in the drawing room, Poirot called for Miles Willoughby. The man strolled in, brushing snow from his sleeve. Something on your mind, monsieur? He asked dryly. Did you enter Lady Constance's room last night? No. Did you speak to her after dinner? Miles shrugged. She summoned me, wanted to speak privately. About what? Her will. Poirot's brow lifted. Indeed, Des. She said she'd changed it, that I'd be disappointed. I told her it didn't matter. She laughed. Poirot pressed. And you left without incident? I did. Hammond saw me coming down the main stairs. Poirot nodded slowly. You do not enter the scullery? No? Poirot watched him closely. You do not like Miss Denham. I don't know her. Frankly, I don't care for people who think humility is a personality. Poirot tapped his pen against his notebook. I must warn you, Monsieur poison is not a crime of passion. It is methodical. Cold. It requires access. Miles narrowed his eyes. Then you're barking up the wrong tree. I wasn't methodical about anything last night. Poirot dismissed him quietly. A moment later, Colonel Race entered unprompted. "I have something you should see," he said. Found it tucked beneath the cushion of the drawing-room divan. He held out a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a note, written in a slanted, elegant hand. "I know what you've done. This ends tonight." There was no signature. Poirot stared at it for a long moment. "A threat," he murmured. "But from whom?" Colonel Race folded his arms. It was wedged well. Someone meant for it to be forgotten or found later. Poirot slipped a note into his diary. "We have an abundance of secrets, mon colonel, but only one truth." And already, he suspected, a clever mind was trying to shape the narrative around a convenient villain. But Hercule Poirot was not so easily deceived. Chapter 03. The note, yellowed by the firelight, lay still on Poirot's lap, as though holding its breath. The words, "I know what you've done. This ends tonight," code with ominous certainty. Code, more curious than its threat, was its existence. Who had written it? Who had received it? Most perplexing of all, why had it remained hidden? Until now, Poirot sat alone in the study, surrounded by silence except for the steady tick of the mantel clock. The note had no signature, no scent, no obvious hand. But the writing told him much. Elegant, yes, but too uniform, too restrained. A deliberate neatness, masked by casual phrasing. He thought of each suspect's handwriting, Colonel Race's blocky scrawl, Miles Willoughby's lazy half-letters, Beatrice Montrose's looping script from church records he'd glimpsed in the village constable's log. This hand belonged to someone who practiced discretion, someone whose personality valued precision over passion. Poirot set the note aside and rose, stretching his back. Something still gnawed at him. Something small and sharp, like a thorn caught in fabric. He left the study and stepped into the central hallway. The portraits lining the walls stared down at him, Willoughbys of generations past, their expressions severe and unyielding. House had a memory, he thought. It knew more than it let on. He wandered toward the south corridor, where the guest rooms were located. Cata, the carpet here was different plusher, newer, with a faint pattern of roses. He passed Iris Denham's room, then Beatrice's, then the empty nursery, untouched since the Willoughby children had left decades ago. And then he stopped. It was nothing, almost, just a small impression on this WINDOWSILL. The hallway window, facing the courtyard, was latched shut. Beneath it, on the dark wood ledge, Poirot saw it. A smear, small, oval-shaped, greasy, not recent, but not old either. He leaned in. Not a handprint, not exactly a thumbprint, too rounded. He opened the window latch and pushed gently. It creaked outward, revealing the ledge and the slope of snowy rooftop beyond. Below, a flower bed lay buried beneath a thin crust of ice. No footprints, at least none visible. The snow was undisturbed. Poirot returned his gaze to the inside ledge. He reached into his pocket and produced a magnifying glass. Under the lens, the smear revealed a faint outline, almost imperceptible, of something more complex than a thumb dot. It was a lip, a kiss, a lipstick mark. Poirot blinked, then smiled. Someone had kissed the window pane from the inside. Someone had stood here, perhaps lost in thought, or perhaps waiting, and pressed their lips lightly to the glass. But who? And when? The shape was too small for Lady Constance. The angle too low for the Colonel or Harcourt. Too delicate for Miles. That left two likely possibilities. Iris Denham or Beatrice Montrose. But there was more. He pulled a handkerchief and gently dabbed at the smear. A faint trace of pigment transferred onto the cloth, soft plum. Not the gaudy crimson favored by young women, nor the pale pinks common to modest older ladies. It was ... unusual, a shade worn not for beauty, but for secrecy. Back in the drawing room, Poirot found Hammond refilling the firewood basket. "Forgive me, Hammond," Poirot said, "but might I ask a question of an intimate domestic nature?" Butler straightened with faint amusement. "If it is within reason, Monsieur Poirot." Lady Constance did she wear lipstick? "Rarely, sir. It's only for formal dinners." She preferred powder and rouge, Mademoiselle Denham. Hammond hesitated. Subtle shades. She avoided cosmetics in Lady Constance's presence. Her ladyship disapproved. "And Madame Montrose?" "Montrose? I do not know, but I believe she brought her own toiletries. They are kept in her traveling case in the blue guest room." Poirot nodded slowly. "And one more question. Did any guest, to your knowledge, open a window in the corridor last night?" "No, sir. I would have noticed." The cold was dreadful. Poirot thanked him and returned upstairs. He knocked softly on Beatrice's door. A moment passed. Then a quiet voice called, "Come in." The room was modest more so than the others. Beatrice Montrose sat at a small desk, reading a book by candlelight. Her suitcase, still half unpacked, sat near the foot of the bed. On the dresser was a small silver tray holding a comb, a cross pendant, a lipstick tube. "Plum, forgive the intrusion," Poirot said gently. "I wanted a word about something I've noticed." She closed her book and looked up, startled. "Of course." Poirot crossed to the dresser and lifted the lipstick. "You do not strike me as someone who paints her face unnecessarily, madame." "I don't. Not anymore. But this shaded is unusual. It's very specific. It was a gift from my sister years ago. I hardly use it." Poirot turned the tube in his hand. "Yet it is half worn." Beatrice's lips tightened. "Stare." "A point, Monsieur Poirot." "There is always a point. Sometimes many." He set the lipstick down. "Did you take a walk last night?" "No." "Did you watch anyone from the corridor window?" Her eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly. "No." "Did you kiss the glass?" A silence. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Forgive me. Memory can be as delicate as lace frayed at the edges." He left her without further comment, but his mind was swirling. Beatrice Montrose Prim, observant, reserved, had left a trace, a moment of vulnerability, sentiment, or something more calculated. Back downstairs, Poirot found Colonel Race polishing his monocle at the fireplace. "Interesting thing," Race said, looking up. "You know, Constance kept a diary." Poirot raised a brow. "Indeed, locked it in her bureau. I only mention it because she once said, if anything ever happens to me, make sure someone reads the damn thing." "I assume that day has come." Poirot straightened. "Where is this bureau?" "In her bedroom. Second drawer on the left. Brass keyhole." Okay. Moments later, Poirot was once again in Lady Constance's room. The velvet rope still dangling from its post like a gallows rope. He opened the drawer carefully and found the diary green leather gold trim. He tested the lock. It was shut tight. He searched the drawer beneath. No key. He turned to the nightstand. No key. Then his eyes fell to the vase on the mantel. Roses, long since wilted, drooped from its edge. He lifted the vase. Beneath it a small brass key, polished by years of handling. He unlocked the diary. The pages crackled faintly. Her handwriting was sharp, slanted, impatient. He flipped through the final week. Miles begged again. I refused. The boy is hopeless. But worse than his pleas is the quiet. Iris is hiding something. She won't meet my eyes. I fear she's not as loyal as she seems. Poirot turned another page. Beatrice. A surprise. There is steel beneath her kindness. She knows more than she says. Perhaps that's why I invited her. I'd rather be watched by someone who listens than surrounded by liars. And then the final entry dated the night of her death. There is something in the tea. I taste it. Subtle, but wrong. I told Iris to pour a fresh cup. She looked startled, almost frightened. I won't drink any more tonight. If anything happens, I have written their names below. Poirot leaned forward. The page was torn out, the name list gone. Poirot closed the diary slowly. The mystery had grown darker. Someone knew the page existed, and someone had taken it. The missing diary page was not simply an omission, it was a declaration. Someone in Greystone Hall had read Lady Constance's final words, known they would, revealed too much, and had taken a calculated risk to conceal them. Poirot stood in the bedroom a moment longer, staring at the tear's edge. The rip was recent, jagged, torn hastily, yet not without intent. The page hadn't been cut or carefully extracted, had been ripped, though whoever found it was startled by what they saw and acted before reason could restrain them. He replaced the diary, locked the drawer, and returned the key beneath the vase as he left the room, his polished shoes making soft clicks on the hardwood floor. Poirot's mind moved swiftly, assembling motives like chess pieces. Everyone in the house had been hurt or felt wronged by Lady Constance. Her power, wealth, and incisive tongue had cut through each of them in different ways. Downstairs, the house had settled into that brittle calm which precedes a storm. Poirot asked Hammond to gather the household in the library, not for confrontation, but for atmosphere. People were always more revealing when placed near one another. Old grievances had a way of slipping loose from the seams. By the time they arrived, Poirot was already seated near the hearth, a slim folder in his lap. A low fire cast flickering light across the room, giving the gathering the look of an ancient tribunal. I have gathered you, Poirot began gently, not to accuse, but to understand. Lady Constance did not die by accident. Her tea contained arsenic. This we know. A murmur moved through the group, even though the news was no longer new. What we do not know, Poirot continued, is why. It turned slightly toward Miles Willoughby, who lounged in the corner with an untouched drink. Monsieur Willoughby, Poirot said, you quarreled with your aunt about money? Miles didn't flinch. I did. She refused you. She did. Can you threaten to leave her will altogether? Smirk. That, too. But she did not remove you, did she? Silence. Then, how would you know? Because she told you. That's why you were angry. She wanted you to think she'd left you nothing to test your reaction. She still believed, I think, that you could change. Miles looked down. She had a twisted way of showing affection. Poirot shifted to Dr. Harcourt, who stood stiffly near the bookshelf. And you, Dr. You, had been her physician for years. But your name, I see, is also listed in the final estate documents under a modest trust. She added it without consulting me, Harcourt said coolly. Poirot lifted a brow. Perhaps it was a reward for discretion. I'm not sure I like your tone, monsieur. Poirot smiled. Then, perhaps you will like my next question even less. Did you ever treat Lady Constance for symptoms consistent with arsenic? Exposure, fatigue, dizziness, abdominal pain? Pause. She complained of tiredness. Yes, but she was old. And she asked for laudanum. She did. I advised against it. Poirot nodded slowly. You knew the signs. You just failed to name them. Next, Poirot turned toward Beatrice Montrose, whose expression had grown unreadably serene. Madame Montrose, he said, you knew Lady Constance less intimately than the others, and yet she confided in you. No? She liked my silence, Beatrice said simply. She also liked control, Poirot countered. Why did she invite you at the last minute? Beatrice folded her hands. She knew I was ... quiet, but watchful. And she was afraid. Afraid of whom? Beatrice didn't answer. Poirot's eyes flicked toward Iris Denham, who looked more fragile now than she had the day before. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Mademoiselle Denham, Poirot said gently, you were closest to Lady Constance's daily routine. You prepared her food, her tea, you delivered her post, you arranged her pillows. At night, I did. And yet, in her final diary entry, she questioned your loyalty. Iris went still. She wrote that. Poirot tilted his head. She did. And now, the page is missing. Iris's eyes welled, but she blinked rapidly. I didn't take it. Poirot leaned forward. Then, who did? A silence followed, taut as wire. Colonel Race cleared his throat. This is all supposition, Poirot. You're turning this house into a stage for fear. Poirot turned to him. And you, Moncarnoyu, are a man of honor. I see it. But even the honorable may act from guilt. You and Lady Constance shared ... history. Race exhaled sharply. Yes, we were young together. She rejected me when she married. I remained ... close. Poirot's eyes softened. Did you love her still? I don't know. Perhaps I loved the memory of her, but she could be cruel. And did she, perhaps, tell you something about the will that made you think she was in danger? She was in danger? Race said nothing. Poirot let the silence stretch, then closed his folder. Let me offer you all something less theoretical, he said. A timeline. He stood and moved to the mantelpiece. At 10:15, the tea was prepared in the scullery. Iris claims she was alone, but someone could have tampered with the tin beforehand, or added something afterward. Poirot held up a gloved hand. At 10:30, Lady Constance was served the tea. She drank from it partially. The cup shows evidence of contact, but not complete consumption. At 10:45, a scream. Iris discovered the body. The tea remained, cooling. The poison had already worked. He turned back to the group. Now, consider this. The diary page is torn from the book sometime after her death, but before the body was sealed. He let the implications sink in. Someone returned to the room, he said, perhaps under the pretense of grief, perhaps as part of the official activity. Someone removed the page with the names and hid it. Miles stood abruptly. And how do you plan to prove that, monsieur? Poirot smiled. I do not need to prove it yet, monsieur. I merely need to listen. The truth, like the body, has its own temperature, and it is beginning to warm. From the corner, Iris suddenly stood. She wanted to change the will, she said, voice trembling. She told me that morning, said she didn't trust Miles or Dr. Harcourt. She asked me to bring her solicitor's contact from the drawer, but when I returned later, she said never mind, that she'd written it all in the diary. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You did not tell me this before. I was afraid, she whispered. Of whom? Her eyes flicked across the room. Poirot nodded slowly. Fear, he said softly, makes accomplices of the innocent, but it also sharpens the instincts of the guilty. He returned to his seat, folding his hands neatly. Let us take a breath. The truth is close, and when it arrives, it shall do so, not with violence, but with precision. As the others shifted in tense silence, Poirot's eyes flicked once more to the lipstick-stained window. There were threads unconnected, faint, but they were beginning to tighten. Motives had surfaced, but soon it would be time for confrontation. And in Poirot's world, confrontation was not an explosion, it was a scalpel. Chapter 04. It began with a sound, not the grand, dramatic scream that had heralded Lady Constance's death, but something subtler. A crash's shattering of porcelain and a sharp gasp, followed by the hurried patter of footsteps along the upstairs corridor. Poirot was in the solarium, a small, glass-walled room overlooking the east garden, sipping weak coffee and studying the torn edge of Lady Constance's diary page. The snow beyond the windows had turned slushy under the pale morning sun, but Greystone Hall remained chilled by suspicion. The noise prompted him to rise at once. Moments later, Hammond appeared, slightly breathless and visibly rattled. There's been ... Another matter, Monsieur Poirot. Miss Denham, in her room. Poirot followed at once, his pace swift but composed, on the upper floor, just outside Iris Denham's door. Beatrice Montrose and Dr. Harcourt had already gathered, their expressions etched with confusion. Inside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. A ceramic lamp had been overturned and shattered. On the floor, a chair was tipped sideways. Iris herself stood near her bed, visibly shaken, her cheeks flushed, her hands trembling around a small wooden box clutched tightly to her chest. Poirot stepped carefully through the broken fragments and closed the door behind him. "What has happened, mademoiselle?" She looked up, her voice trembling. "Someone broke in while I was downstairs. They went through my drawers, my wardrobe. This," she held out the box, "this was hidden under the floorboard. Only I knew where it was." Poirot took the box gently and examined it. It was plain, with a delicate brass latch, not locked, but clearly old. He opened it slowly. Inside were folded letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age and tied together with a red silk ribbon. There were photographs as well. A young Iris with a Mana soldier by his uniforms smiling in front of a seaside backdrop, a silver locket. And, near the bottom, a stained envelope addressed in flowing script to Miss Iris Denham, Greystone, Hall. He glanced up at her. "May I?" She nodded. He unfolded the top letter and read silently. It was affectionate, emotional, romantic. Poirot understood at once. These are from someone forbidden. Iris lowered her eyes. "From the gardener's son, Peter Morley. Years ago, Lady Constance forbade me from seeing him, said it was beneath the house's dignity. When she found out, she dismissed him." Poirot returned the box. "You kept this hidden?" "Yes. She would have had it destroyed." "Huh? But it's mine. My only piece of him." Poirot's tone remained gentle. "And someone found it, I think. They were looking for something else, but when they couldn't find it, they took this from under the board and threw it aside, like it meant nothing." "Did they take anything?" "I don't know yet." Up the page from the diary cut. "It'd have been here." Poirot turned toward the others. "Who was first on this floor after breakfast?" Beatrice shook her head. "I was in the library, reading." Dr. Harcourt's frown deepened. "I was in the kitchen, discussing coffee with Hammond." Poirot said nothing. He turned and surveyed the room. Whoever had ransacked it was no amateur. The drawers had been disturbed, but not carelessly. The wardrobe was open, yet no garments were out of place. The bedspread was rumpled, but not torn. They weren't searching in rage. They were searching with purpose. Poirot's eyes moved to the windows lightly ajar. He walked over, opened it fully, and looked down. Snow still lined the sill, but one patch near the ledge was smeared a palm print. Faint, but clear. Someone had used the window as an entry or exit point. He turned back. "Who knew of the box?" "No one," Iris whispered. Poirot nodded slowly. "But you think they weren't? After the letters?" She hesitated. "No, I think we're looking for something else. Maybe the diary page." Poirot met her eyes. "And why would it be here?" She swallowed. "'Cause Lady Constance once asked me to hide something for her years ago. A sealed letter. She told me, if anything happens to me, make sure they know I suspected someone. I asked who she meant. She said, 'You'll know when it's time.'" Poirot grew very still. "And do you still have it?" Iris nodded. "I hid it inside a book, but when I checked this morning, it was gone." Poirot's gaze darkened. "This second incident is not random," he said. "It is a tremor. A sign that the foundation of lies is cracking. Someone fears exposure and is acting in desperation." Later that afternoon, Poirot called Hammond to the study once more. "Hammond," he said, "I must know, has anyone asked for access to the attic, cellar, or storage rooms since Lady Constance's death?" The butler considered. "Only Dr. Harcourt. He asked to check the cellar for old medicine records. I permitted him entry yesterday. Was he alone? Yes. Poirot tapped his notebook with the tip of his finger. And is there a second entrance to the house? One not used by guests. There is the tradesman's entrance near the west side. It's rarely locked during the day. Mercy. That evening, Poirot took a slow walk around the estate grounds. The snow had turned slushy underfoot, and every step left a softened impression. By the time he reached the west side of the manor, near the tradesman's door, he found what he sought: a set of boot prints. Not deep, not fresh, but recent enough. He studied them under his torchlight. The sole had a distinctive wear paterna, small crescent missing from the right heel. Back inside, Poirot returned to the study, where the guests were slowly gathering for supper. He glanced down at the shoes lined neatly by the radiator, and there it was, Miles Willoughby's boots, right heels lightly worn. The same crescent missing. Poirot said nothing, only filed it away, tucking it carefully into the web of details forming in his mind. That night, he declined supper and instead sat in the library alone. The fire burned low. The clock ticked steadily. The house had now seen two events: the murder of Lady Constance and the violation of Iris's private room. Both acts committed in silence, both driven by fear. He opened his notebook and wrote down a list of names, circling two of them. Then he underlined one word. The next morning, storm had broken. Not the snowstorm outside that had calmed overnight, into a brittle stillness, but within Greystone Hall, tension had crystallized into something sharper. There was no more illusion of a leisurely country weekend. Every guest now moved with caution, casting sideways glances and avoiding long conversations, afraid of what might slip. Poirot, by contrast, was unhurried. He dressed impeccably navy. Suit, white collar, stiffened, just so, his patent leather shoes polished to a mere finish. As he descended to the drawing room, a faint tune whistled from his lips. A little-known Belgian lullaby, cheerful, out of place, precisely as he intended. At 10 o'clock, he invited each guest to join him, one at a time, for tea in the library. But this was no interrogation, no notepad, no accusations, no formal tone, just tea. And yet, by the end of the morning, every suspect had said something they hadn't meant to. The first visit, Miles Willoughby. Miles Willoughby. Miles strolled in with an air of defiance, settling into the armchair as though he owned the estate already. "You're wasting time," he muttered. "You don't seriously think I poisoned her?" "I think," Poirot replied gently, "that you relied too much on your own cynicism to protect you from truth." Miles narrowed his eyes. Meaning that when one prepares a lie, one often tries to make it look untidy, as if truth must be accidental. Poirot offered him tea, then watched his hands closely. Miles reached for the cup with his left hand. "You're left-handed, monsieur?" "No, but you reach with the left." Nervousness. Miles blinked, then shifted. "It's nothing." Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed, he made a note once Miles had left. It's the heel of the right boot. It's the left-hand reach. Nervousness often exposed habits a man tried to hide. The second visit, Beatrice Montrose Beatrice entered with composure, but her eyes were alert. Studying, she sat near the window and took her tea in silence. Poirot poured gently. "Tell me, madame," he said, "what is your impression of Iris Denham?" Beatrice stirred her cup once. "She's kind, thoughtful, but not foolish. She sees more than she says. A rare quality. It's rarer still to survive in a house like this." Poirot studied her expression. "Did Lady Constance confide in you regarding her estate?" "She mentioned names." "May I ask, did she name you?" Beatrice hesitated. Then she said, "I would receive something modest." She knew I wouldn't want more. "But you accepted the invitation to visit?" "Yes." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And what did she know that brought you here?" Beatrice looked away. "That I owed her once, long ago." Poirot watched her silently. She offered nothing further, but she had shown something else a shift. The first flicker of guilt or memory. He would press that seam later. The third visit, Dr. Harcourt, the physician, arrived with cool confidence. Kay declined sugar, sat stiffly, and drank quickly as if to end the meeting before it began. "Doctor," Poirot began, "you were granted access to the cellar to look for records, medical history." She was a hypochondriac. "I thought they might prove useful. You are aware, I presume, that the poison was arsenic?" Kaya read your summary. "I also recall stating she had digestive issues for months." Poirot leaned forward. "That you did not suspect poisoning earlier? That guilt or caution?" "Neither," Harcourt snapped. "It's called experience. And the diary page, the missing letter." He shrugged. "Not my department." Poirot refilled the teapot. "No, but you are a man who likes to be thorough. And thorough men do not overlook clues unless they have reason to." Harcourt said nothing. When he left, Poirot wrote a single word beside his name: control. The fourth visit, Iris Denamiris, arrived last. Her hands were still faintly trembling. Poirot guided her to the window seat and sat opposite her. "Miss Denham," he said softly, "you are no longer just a companion in this house. You are central to its remaining mystery." "Don't want to be," she whispered. Poirot nodded. "Understandable. But tell me, how well do you know the other guests?" "I was raised here," she said. "I watched them arrive and go. Miles was cruel as a boy. The Colonel was kind. Dr. Harcourt ignored me. Beatrice, ... I admired." "You admired Beatrice?" "She was brave. She once stood up to Lady Constance in church. No one else dared." Poirot tilted his head. "What about the letters? I would have destroyed them, but I couldn't let go. Oh, they were all I had." Poirot gave her a kind smile. "When a heart breaks, mademoiselle, it echoes in many directions. Sometimes the sound is loudest in others." She nodded faintly, then left, and Poirot knew she had not killed Lady Constance. She lacked the detachment, but someone had tried to frame her. By late afternoon, Poirot stood once more in the corridor outside Iris's room. He examined the doorframe, the window. Then, in a quiet moment, he retrieved a small envelope from his jacket pocket and slipped it beneath Beatrice Montrose's door. Inside was a note in Poirot's neat, symmetrical script. "Madame, we must speak before dinner. There are questions you alone can answer. H.P." He returned to the study and waited. 10 minutes later, Beatrice arrived. "You found something," she said. "I did not need to find it," Poirot replied. "It came to me." He gestured to a chair. "I believe you took the diary page." Beatrice stiffened. "You believe?" "Yes, because it was written to protect Iris, and only someone who once needed such protection would recognize its importance." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I took it before the constables sealed the room." "And what did it say?" She inhaled. It named 3 people Lady Constance no longer trusted: Miles, Harcourt, and herself. Poirot blinked herself. She had begun to forget things. She feared she might one day cause her own harm through carelessness. It terrified her. Poirot stared into the fire. And yet, someone made sure that page would never be read. Aloud, "I thought it would point to Iris. I couldn't let that happen. And the letter she asked you to hide." Beatrice paused. "I gave it to Iris weeks ago. Said I didn't want the responsibility. She must have hidden it." Poirot stood. "One last thing. Madame, why the kiss on the window pane?" Beatrice's eyes glistened. "I remembered what it was like to be young, and in love, and alone." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci. That night, As the household gathered once more for supper, Poirot stood at the hearth and watched each face carefully. The performance was nearly over. One more act. One final confrontation. And then, as always, order restored. Chapter 05. The snow had returned by evening, falling gently this time, like lace unfurling over Greystone Hall's aging rooftops. Inside, the air was close, tense. It was the sort of silence that pressed into one's lungs at precisely 7 o'clock. As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, immaculate, centered, and utterly in control. "Mies, Amos," he said, addressing the assembled household. "Thank you for joining me. We have reached the moment of conclusion." They were all there, Miles Willoughby lounging too casually in an armchair, Iris Denham curled nervously at the edge of a chaise, Dr. Harcourt standing near the drinks tray, his arms folded defensively. Beatrice Montrose sat still and pale by the fireplace. Colonel Race leaned against the mantel, his expression unreadable. Poirot took his time. He walked to the center of the room, his patent shoes silent on the carpet. When Lady Constance Willoughby died, it seemed at first an unfortunate event brought on by age or natural ailment. But the truth is like the flame of a single candle in a darkened room. Once lit, it reveals all. Hay paused, letting the metaphor breathe. It was poison. Arsenic, delivered subtly in her evening tea. A method requiring planning, calculation, and proximity. No one spoke. "I have walked the house," Poirot continued, "examined rooms, spoken with each of you, not just to hear words, but to understand character. Because murder, you see, is not about the method alone. It is about the mind behind it." Kay glanced toward Iris. Lady Constance suspected she was in danger. She recorded as much in her diary. She also wrote a final note naming those she no longer trusted. That page was torn from the diary before the constables arrived. Miles leaned forward. "So, that proves nothing. You have no idea who took it." "Ah, but I do." Moreau's eyes swept the room. It was Beatrice Montrose. Gasps. Beatrice flinched, but Poirot raised a hand. She did not kill Lady Constance. She protected the innocent. She removed the page because she feared the names upon it would endanger Iris Denham. She remembered what it was to be powerless beneath someone's roof. "Is that not so, madame?" Beatrice quietly gave a single nod. Poirot turned. "Now, to motive. Each of you had reason. Colonel Race had a buried affection, perhaps even resentment for Lady Constance's rejection. Dr. Harcourt stood to lose his modest legacy should she alter the will. Kevin had been forbidden to marry her love. Beatrice had old debts. And Miles, Monsieur Willoughby. Miles rolled his eyes. "Here we go. You were desperate. Gambling debts, dishonored accounts. Can't, you believed correctly that your aunt was reconsidering her estate." Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out a worn piece of paper. "This, Mies Amos, is the missing letter. The one Lady Constance had sealed years ago. Iris thought it had been taken, but in truth, it had been hidden again, this time by someone else." He laid the letter on the table. It was addressed to a solicitor. Inside, she instructed her lawyer to revise her will, removing Miles entirely and leaving the estate to charitable causes with modest sums reserved for Iris, Beatrice, and the Colonel. Poirot let the silence grow dense. "She never sent it," he said softly. "She feared confrontation, but she told Iris of her plan." He turned to Miles. "You confronted her that night, didn't you?" Miles opened his mouth to deny, but Poirot cut him off. "You argued in the music room." The maids heard raised voices. "You begged her not to change the will. She refused. When you decided." Poirot began to pace, slowly, methodically. "You knew her routines. The tea always chamomile before bed. You didn't add poison that night. No, it had been placed days earlier. The tin itself. A slow build. A plausible decline. He turned on his heel. But you made a mistake, Miles laughed dryly. Did I? Did I? Yes. You returned later that night to make sure she was dead. You crept up the corridor. You opened the window in case you needed an escape route. And when you saw she had passed, you noticed the diary. Poirot held up his hand. The torn page, jagged, torn hastily. But it was not burned or destroyed. You feared that drawing too much attention, okay? Instead, you hid it. Poirot walked to the drinks cabinet, opened the lower drawer, and withdrew a small folded scrap. He opened it. Torn page with faded handwriting. Lady Constance's handwriting. This was hidden inside the empty port decanter. Another round of shocked murmurs. Poirot turned toward the fireplace. I found it 2 nights ago, but I waited, because to reveal it too soon would have forced the killer deeper into hiding. Miles stood abruptly. You're bluffing? That could be anyone's writing. Poirot tilted his head. But it is not. It names 3 people, and it begins with, if anything should happen to me, I no longer trust. He tapped the paper. You are first on the list. Poirot turned now to Harcourt. But you, Doctor, you are not innocent. You knew something was wrong with her condition. You ignored the signs. You allowed it to continue, whether for your own gain or because of fear. I do not know. But you aided the crime through silence. Harcourt's face paled. Poirot returned to the center. The window of the palm print outside. Iris's room matched the wear pattern of one person's shoes. Right heel, missing crescent. Miles's mask cracked then just slightly. A twitch of the cheek. You planted suspicion in Iris's room, Poirot said. You hoped to find the letter and the diary page. You failed. But the damage was done. Poirot now raised both hands. This case was not solved with fingerprints or alibis. It was solved through character, through understanding who would act out of fear and who out of entitlement. He faced Miles once more. You, sir, are intelligent, but you underestimated those around you. Lady Constance, Iris, Beatrice, even me. There was a long silence. Then, Colonel Race stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Miles's shoulder. You fool, the colonel muttered. She raised you better. Miles didn't resist as the colonel guided him toward the hallway, where Hammond stood quietly, already on the telephone with the local inspector. Poirot turned toward the fire. Its glow had grown stronger now, steady, contained. He took a deep breath. Order. You see, he said softly, must always return. 2 days had passed since the truth had emerged, and yet Greystone Hall still seemed to echo with the intensity of that evening. Miles Willoughby had not confessed, but neither had he denied the evidence when faced with the torn diary page, solicitor's letter, and the palm print outside Iris's window. He was now in custody, awaiting formal charges. Inspector Graves had arrived the morning after the reveal, quick-footed and sharp-eyed, but even he had conceded that Poirot had wrapped the matter in a bow. Dr. Harcourt had quietly left that afternoon, declining supper and asking only that his belongings be sent to his private practice in Wiltshire. The inspector had not arrested him, but Poirot's suggestion had not gone unheard. Harcourt had not killed Lady Constance, but his negligence, perhaps fueled by cowardice or ambition, had helped it happen. That truth would follow him, quietly, like a shadow on his career. The others remained at the estate a day longer, as the legal formalities unspooled. Hammond bustled about with quiet efficiency. Iris had taken to the garden in the afternoons, walking among the frosted hedges with a calm she hadn't shown before. Beatrice Montrose spent much of her time in the solarium, hands clasped in her lap, saying little. And Colonel Race, loyal and ever silent, assisted in managing the house's arrangements, while the solicitors conferred with the local magistrate. Poirot, ever, remained poised. It was on the third morning that he took his leave. He descended the staircase with his valise in one hand and his hat balanced perfectly on his head. In the entrance hall, Iris was waiting. "You're leaving?" she asked, voice hushed. He smiled warmly. "Oui, mademoiselle, detective. Now it is the business of courts and solicitors." She nodded, then hesitated. "I wanted to thank you." Poirot tilted his head. "For what, may I ask?" "For not assuming the worst of me, and for seeing the truth when no one else could." Poirot stepped closer. "You were brave. You protected memory and meaning even when grief clouded your sight. That, mademoiselle, is no small thing." She looked down, and when she looked up again, there were tears in her eyes. Will I always remember her this way? Not the arguments or the cruelty, but ... this end. Poirot considered the question deeply before replying. "No, you will remember the full measure of her, the sharpness, the strength, even the loneliness that clung to her like perfume. But you must not let her death define her. That belongs to the man who took it from her." Iris nodded, slowly, as if his words were a balm. From the side hallway, Beatrice appeared, gloved and composed. "I was hoping I might catch you," she said. "I owe you more than I can express." "You owe me nothing, madame," Poirot replied. With grace, she approached, and for the first time, there was softness in her eyes and openness that had not been there when they first met. "I once told Constance I would never return to this house, but I did, and now I think I can finally leave it behind." Poirot inclined his head. "Some places are prisons, even without bars." Okay. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Beatrice leaned forward and kissed him gently on both cheeks. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "you reminded me of someone I once believed in." Poirot offered a small bow. Hammond entered with Poirot's overcoat, already dusted and buttoned against the cold. The car outside was idling. The snow had returned again, light and powdery, dusting the steps in a clean white veil. As Poirot reached the front door, Colonel Race met him on the threshold. "You're not going to wait for the inquest?" the colonel asked. Poirot shook his head. "I have seen justice enough for now." The colonel nodded. "You were right, of course. She never stopped controlling the Board of Inn after death. But I think, in her way, she was ready for it." Poirot paused before replying. "Lady Constance feared loss more than death. Control gave her meaning, and when she sensed that control slipping, she tried to shape the ending." He turned toward the frosted drive. "But murder cannot be shaped. The codes, warps, even those who do not commit it become tainted." He turned back one final time. "It is up to those who remain to restore the frame." With that, he stepped into the cold, his boots crunching against the snow. The car pulled away slowly, the estate fading behind the curtain of winter. Inside the warmth of the vehicle, Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The case had not been one of his most elaborate. There were no locked rooms, no exotic poisons smuggled from Istanbul, but it had required precision, observation, perhaps most importantly, compassion. He opened his little notebook and made a final entry beneath the last neatly drawn line. "Murder committed not for hatred, but for survival. The mistake, believing that inheritance replaces identity. The truth, legacy, belongs not to the rich, but to the remembered." He snapped the book closed. Outside, the English countryside stretched out quiet, still waiting for spring, and somewhere, perhaps in another village, another letter was being written, another secret whispered, another deception unfolding like a paper swan. But for now, Hercule Poirot rested. His work, as always, was to restore order one broken symmetry at a time. Chapter 6. It was 4 days after Poirot's departure from Greystone Hall when the first letter arrived. Iris Denham found it among the Morning Post wedged between a solicitor's note and a charity appeal. There was no return address, only her name, written in an elegant hand she didn't recognize, sealed with a wax stamp, a gold thistle. She opened it cautiously. Seated at the long dining table that now seemed too large for one, inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, thick with the crispness of expensive stationery. Miss Denham, the matter of your inheritance is not as settled as you may believe. There are documents your aunt never intended the solicitors to find. You seek to preserve her legacy or your own. You must act swiftly. Someone else already has. He has.